The cold wind bit through my jacket as I stood at the base of East Ridge, staring at the bright orange barricades blocking the access road. The HOA had done it. They'd taken control of the very route I'd kept clear for over a decade. Sarah Langford, the new president, had decided my snowplow was no longer welcome. They'd hired some professional contractor to take over. My plow, my rig, was being seized. I hadn't even received a courtesy call, just a letter slipped under my garage door telling me that my snow removal was unauthorized. As I read the letter a third time, my blood began to boil. No warning, no thanks for the years I'd spent making sure this road stayed open in every storm. I knew what this meant. They'd chosen to prioritize bureaucracy over safety. Then the voicemail came. Sarah's voice dripped with faux sympathy. "We've hired a contractor who will handle things properly now, Jack. We just need you to step aside." I clenched the phone. "You have no idea what you're doing," I muttered. The wind howled, and I looked again at the barricades, the weight of the storm creeping in. Sarah and the HOA thought they had everything under control, but when the blizzard hit, they'd wish they had listened to me. Sarah Langford stood in front of the HOA's converted pool house, casually sipping her coffee, her designer parka gleaming white against the bleak gray sky. Her pristine demeanor was all part of the new reform she'd promised Ridgepoint Estates, a fresh face for a community desperate for change, or so she thought. She had an air about her like someone who believed their title made them untouchable. A woman who wielded control like a weapon, without ever getting her hands dirty. To her, snow was just an inconvenience, a detail to be managed by someone else. I had known Sarah for months, but we'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries. As I pulled my old snowplow into the HOA parking lot that morning, I saw her standing there a little too smug with a man I didn't recognize, someone from ClearPath Services, the company Sarah had hired to take over snow removal. I had no doubt that this was her idea of progress. "Tom, this is Jake Turner," Sarah greeted me, waving toward the contractor. "He'll be handling the plowing from now on. Much more professional than, well, someone who just happens to own a snowplow." Her voice carried an edge, a dismissive undertone that stung more than I cared to admit. She thought her words were nothing more than a casual remark, but they hit me like a slap. "Jake's equipment is top of the line," she continued. "We've hired them to ensure everything's up to code. No more rogue plowing." I clenched my fists, but kept my voice calm. This road needs someone who knows the terrain. It's not like your suburban streets. We get ice that won't melt for days, and winds that carve drifts like walls. Sarah's smile didn't waver. "That's why we brought in the professionals," she said almost patronizingly. "Relying on one person isn't sustainable, Tom. We need consistency. You've done your best, but it's time for a change." She wasn't listening, not to the logic, not to the warnings, just to the idea that a shiny contractor from another town who didn't even understand our mountain passes was the answer. To Sarah, this wasn't about the safety of the community. This was about control. I stared at her, my frustration building. The words that came next were deliberate. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. You have no idea what's coming." She didn't flinch. Instead, she waved me off her focus, already shifting to her next agenda. "We'll see, won't we?" she replied, smiling that same irritatingly confident smile. The letter arrived just days after Sarah Langford's smug little meeting. I expected it, but I still couldn't believe it. It wasn't even sent by mail. No, they slipped it right under my garage door like they thought they were hiding something important. The Ridgepoint Estates HOA had officially deemed me unauthorized. "Dear Mr. Jack Travers," it began in its usual formal detached tone. "Effective immediately, you are prohibited from performing any snow removal operations within Ridgepoint Estates, including the East Ridge Access Road, shared community areas, and all other non-private driveways. You are hereby ordered to cease all snow plowing activities." The letter rambled on about liabilities, proper certifications, and how the HOA had now secured a professional contractor to handle all snow removal needs from this point forward. They hired ClearPath Services, a company from a town miles away that had no understanding of the local terrain or weather patterns. It was nothing more than a shortcut to save money and avoid responsibility. They weren't interested in what was best for the community. They just wanted to appear efficient. And then came the fines. The real punch to the gut. Violators will be subject to escalating fines starting at $500 for the first offense. Any subsequent violations will result in fines of $2,000 per incident. My hands shook as I read those words. They weren't just trying to take my plow, they were attacking my integrity. They wanted to pretend that hiring someone else, a company with no connection to the community, was somehow going to keep our roads safer. Worse still, they were branding me as a liability, a word I hated with every ounce of my being. I knew exactly what this was. Control. They didn't care about safety. They just didn't like that I was doing something they couldn't manage. I could feel my blood pressure rising as I reread the letter. I'd been keeping that East Ridge Road clear for over a decade. I'd done it through snowstorms that would have made others turn back, when paramedics couldn't get through, when ambulances would be stuck behind drifts. I knew that road like the back of my hand, the subtle dips where the ice formed first, the steep inclines where snow packed into thick layers. The work had become second nature to me, but it wasn't just about clearing snow. It was about ensuring the people in this neighborhood could get to the hospital, or make it to their job, or simply return home safely. But none of that mattered to the HOA. I wasn't just mad. I was furious. Not at Sarah Langford. No, I was mad at the whole damn system that allowed her and the rest of the board to make decisions like this without ever stepping outside their bubble. They had no idea what they were doing. They couldn't possibly understand what that road meant to people like Bill, the elderly man a few streets over, who relied on it to get to his dialysis appointments. Or Megan, the single mom on Elm Street, who couldn't afford to miss a shift at the diner because rent was already overdue. For the first time in years, I wanted to call it quits, just park my truck, walk away, and let them figure it out on their own. But I couldn't. I couldn't live with that on my conscience. I was about to write them a letter back, but something inside me snapped. No, I wasn't going to do it their way. I wasn't going to let them bully me into submission. I wasn't going to sit back and let Sarah Langford and her board of arrogant, out-of-touch bureaucrats put the lives of the people in this neighborhood at risk. So the next morning, just like I had done for the past 12 winters, I climbed into the driver's seat of my old International 4900 Snowplow. The truck growled to life chains, clinking like old armor as I backed it out of the garage. There was no time to waste. I had work to do. My first pass through East Ridge felt a little different, though. The chill in the air wasn't just from the snow. It felt like something was shifting. I could almost feel Sarah's eyes on me, her mind already plotting her next move, waiting for me to slip up. But I didn't care. I didn't care about her plans or the HOA's authority. What mattered was making sure this road stayed clear. People needed it. I started salting the curb and clearing the edges of the road before the sun had even risen. I wasn't out there for recognition, not for Sarah's approval or the HOA's pompous claps on the back. I was doing it because it needed to be done. As I pushed the plow up and down the road, the snowflakes began to fall heavier, swirling in gusts of wind. It was a bitter reminder that winter wasn't going to take it easy on us this year. That was fine with me. I'd been in enough storms to know what was coming. I finished the East Ridge Road in a little over 2 hours, my back aching and my fingers numb from the cold. But it felt good. The road was clear, and now it was ready. For the next time when someone needed it most. When I got back home, there was a message waiting on my phone from Sarah Langford. "Jack," she said, her voice almost too pleasant, "we've received reports that you've once again gone against HOA orders. We will be filing a formal complaint if this happens again. Please respect the rules." I didn't even bother calling her back. I just tossed the phone on the counter and cracked open a beer. She wasn't going to stop me. Not now, not ever. But I knew this wasn't over. They would find another way to make my life harder. I could already see it coming, their next move. And I was ready. The snowstorm hit hard just a few days after the HOA had made its move. The kind of storm that didn't just coat everything in white, it wrapped the entire world in an impenetrable frozen veil. By the time I got up to plow East Ridge again, the sky was dark, with snow wind howling through the trees like some wild animal on a hunt. I had already warned her about the contractor, about their lack of experience in these mountain conditions. But she ignored it, just like I knew she would. I figured I'd see for myself, though. I had to. ClearPath Services had rolled in with their shiny new plows and their fancy equipment. They set up early, ready to tackle the snow, their trucks lined up in the parking lot at the edge of the community. I watched from my driveway as they geared up the wind, pulling at their coats, making everything look desperate. But I wasn't surprised. I knew what was coming. Jake Turner, the contractor from ClearPath, waved at me as I walked out to my truck, and I gave him a tight nod. He was young, probably not much older than my son, with that fresh-faced look you get when you've never really faced a storm like this one. His plow truck wasn't a match for East Ridge. It was built for flat, wide roads, nothing like the winding, steep hills of Ridgepoint Estates. Morning Jack Jake called out, his voice muffled by the wind. "We'll have this done in no time." I didn't say anything right away, just studied the way his truck sat, its tires barely gripping the pavement, and the way the snow began to pile up in front of his plow. It wasn't going to end well. I knew it. "You sure about this?" I asked, finally speaking. "You've got to be careful up here. The East Ridge Road, it's a different beast. You've got steep inclines, sharp turns. You're going to need chains on your tires, and you'll have to salt the road before it's too late. Jake looked back at me, blinking in the harsh wind. We've got this, he said confidently, but I could see a bit of doubt in his eyes. I didn't press him further. The weather would do the talking soon enough. The storm hit full force by midday. Snow came in thick, heavy sheets, with wind gusts making the road disappear beneath a blanket of white. The forecast had called for around 12 inches, but this was looking closer to 18, maybe even 20. It wouldn't take much for the roads to become impassable. I kept my eyes on the contractor. It didn't take long for me to notice that their trucks were barely moving. I could hear the grinding noise of their plows as they fought through the snow, but it wasn't going well. The trucks weren't built for this kind of snow, and without chains or proper equipment for steep inclines, they were getting stuck. It didn't take long before I saw Jake's truck buried up to the axles in snow. Frustration boiled inside me, but I kept my distance. There was no point in rubbing it in, but I could see the problem unfolding. It wasn't just the contractor struggling, it was everyone. The entire East Ridge Road was starting to shut down. No one was going anywhere. I'd seen this happen before, and I knew the consequences. That road was the only safe route in and out when the storm raged like this, and now it was gone. I knew the worst was coming. This wasn't just about the HOA and their bad decisions, it was about the people who lived here. There were folks who relied on that road to get to the hospital, to work, to feed their families, but the HOA didn't see it that way. Sarah had made sure of that. As I sat there watching the contractor's truck slowly sink deeper into the snow, I knew I had to act. There was no one else who could do it. Sure, the county plows would show up later, but they wouldn't reach this part of the neighborhood for hours, maybe even longer. They had bigger priorities, main roads, hospitals. I was the only one who knew how to clear the East Ridge Road. But that didn't matter to Sarah Langford. To her, it was about the rules. The contractor was authorized, and I was just a rogue operator. I pulled out my phone, checked the weather, and saw the blizzard was only going to get worse. I tried calling Sarah, but the signal kept cutting out. It was clear she was either too busy with other things or avoiding the call. That left me with no choice. I fired up my international 4900 again. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission. As I backed out of my driveway and turned the plow toward East Ridge, I could see the snowbank already rising higher by the minute. I didn't even hesitate. The sooner I cleared the road, the sooner people could get through. It was as simple as that. I rolled up to the East Ridge access road, where the snow was already waist deep, the wind howling and swirling like a beast. I could barely make out the faint shapes of the contractor's trucks ahead. They were stalled, their lights barely visible in the whiteout. I was going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. I dropped the blade and started pushing forward. The truck's heavy chains bit into the snow, and the engine groaned with each push. The snow was dense, heavy, and wet, but I knew this plow. I knew how to handle it. Behind me, I saw the contractor's trucks still stuck, their operators standing helpless in the snow. No one was coming to help. The storm wasn't waiting for anyone. I knew this was just the beginning. The real test would be getting people to trust me again if they ever did. But that was a problem for later. Right now, all that mattered was clearing the way. The East Ridge Road was now a lost cause. Despite my best efforts, the snow was falling too fast, too thick. The East Ridge Access Road, once a reliable route for everyone in the neighborhood, had become a quagmire choked with snow and blocked at every turn by drifts taller than my truck's hood. The wind had picked up, making visibility near zero, and the temperature had dropped faster than I could keep up with. I pushed on through the drifts, the plow groaning in protest as it scraped over frozen layers of ice and snow. I could hear the engine straining with every inch gained, but I knew it wasn't enough. I had done what I could, but the storm was overwhelming, and the contractor's attempt to help had only made the situation worse. Their trucks were stuck, and now the neighborhood was effectively cut off. As I made my way back down the hill to the neighborhood, I could see the community starting to react. I had already received multiple calls from concerned residents, and some were even asking if they could make it out to work or appointments. Lynn, the vice president of the HOA, was one of the first to call. Her voice was tight, clearly concerned, but trying to maintain control. "Tom, we need that road cleared. The emergency vehicles need to get through," she snapped. I felt a brief flash of vindication. For the first time, I saw it what I had been warning Sarah and the HOA about for months. It was all happening right in front of us. "I'm doing the best I can, Lynn," I replied, my voice hardening. "But it's not just about plowing. It's about knowing the road and knowing how to handle the conditions. You can't just throw a contractor into this without understanding what you're dealing with." Lynn didn't respond. She couldn't. She knew I was right, but what she knew didn't matter. What mattered was the HOA's position, the one they had fought so hard to protect. They couldn't admit they were wrong. They couldn't back down. It was all about control, and it was too late to do anything about it. That's when I realized the full depth of the situation. It wasn't just that they had made a bad decision, it was that they had knowingly put everyone in danger. Sarah Langford, the HOA president, had pushed this agenda, demanding a contractor that didn't understand the terrain and had no experience in the area. They had been focused on contracts, financial savings, and appearances, anything to make it look like they were doing something professional, while overlooking the one thing that mattered most: community safety. I had always known Sarah was more interested in playing politics than doing the right thing, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't just incompetence, it was willful ignorance. And it wasn't just about snow, it was about control. Sarah had wanted to push me out, to make me look irrelevant, so she could pave the way for her new, improved version of Ridgepoint Estates, complete with her shiny contractors and slick presentations. I needed proof. Later that afternoon, while I was still out on the road, my mind started to churn. The situation was only going to get worse from here, but I needed something concrete. I couldn't just rely on my words. I had to prove that Sarah's decision was more than just an oversight. There was a reason behind her actions, and I was going to find it. As the sun dipped below the peaks of the mountains, casting a dim light over the snow-covered landscape, I headed to the HOA office. I had an idea that might finally connect the dots and expose Sarah for what she really was. ClearPath Services hadn't just failed, they were connected. Sarah's decision to hire them wasn't a mistake, it was a deliberate move, and I was about to find out how deep that connection went. The HOA office was quiet when I arrived. It was a small converted pool house, nothing fancy, but enough to hold Sarah's personal stash of documents and contracts. I walked in, and Sarah was at her desk sorting through papers. She looked up when I entered, her eyes immediately narrowing, but she didn't say anything. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to see the contract with ClearPath Services," I said, my voice steady but firm. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced at the file cabinet beside her, then back at me. The hesitation didn't escape my notice. "Why?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "What do you think you'll find?" I didn't respond. I just stared at her. The silence stretched between us like a tight wire, and I could feel the tension building. Finally, after a long pause, she slid the file across the desk to me. As I opened the folder, I immediately saw the terms. But there was something else too. A series of emails were attached. One in particular caught my eye. It was an email from Derek Langley, the former HOA president, to a representative of ClearPath Services. The subject line was innocuous enough: winter contract proposal. But the email itself was much more telling. It outlined specific terms regarding a special arrangement for snow removal, but there was a line that stood out like a sore thumb. "Please note that we are open to discussing financial incentives for meeting our expectations, especially in difficult winters." The email was signed off with a phrase that sent a cold chill down my spine. "Let's discuss further over drinks next week." The email wasn't about snow removal. It was about something much darker. I quickly snapped a picture of the email, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about a bad contractor or bad decisions. It was about corruption. Money was changing hands. Sarah had made this decision because there was something in it for her. I wasn't going to let it go. I left the office quietly, but I had the proof now. The situation had escalated beyond just bad decisions and bad weather. This was a financial scheme, and it was bigger than I thought. As the storm raged on outside, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just fighting for the East Ridge Road anymore. I was fighting for the truth. The moment I walked out of the HOA office with that email in hand, I knew the stakes had just risen. It wasn't just about the East Ridge Road anymore. This wasn't a simple battle between a resident and a board. It was about corruption, incompetence, and a community that had been put at risk because of a series of bad decisions. The worst part, Sarah and her board had known better, but ignored it for their own gain. I had the proof I needed. Now it was time to take it to the right people. The snowstorm was still raging outside, the visibility almost non-existent. I went straight to the county sheriff's office. I had worked with Deputy Dave Meyer in the past on some storm-related issues, and he was someone who understood the importance of keeping East Ridge clear. I needed him to see this, to understand the full scope of what was happening. As I walked into the sheriff's office, I found Dave sitting at his desk, sipping coffee, and staring at the weather reports. He looked up when I entered, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Tom, good to see you." "What's going on?" Dave asked, his voice a bit strained over the sound of the storm outside. "I've got something you need to see," I said, pulling the folder out of my jacket. I dropped it on his desk with a thud. It's about the HOA and the contractor they hired to handle snow removal for Ridgepoint Estates. They've been blocking my plowing operation, but there's more to it. Dave raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. He didn't say anything, but motioned for me to continue. I quickly explained what had happened, laying out the timeline of events, how Sarah Langford and the HOA had taken control of snow removal, despite my warnings and experience, and how their contractor had failed miserably. I showed him the email that proved financial ties between Sarah and Clear Path Services. "Let me get this straight," Dave said, scanning through the email. "You're telling me that Sarah Langford has been getting kickbacks from a contractor she hired to take over snow removal, even though they're completely unqualified for the job?" "Exactly," I said, my voice steady. "They've put this whole neighborhood at risk, and now I'm stuck with the fallout. The East Ridge Road is blocked, and the emergency access is gone. If something happens, if someone needs that road to get to the hospital or make it to work, there's going to be hell to pay." Dave sat back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "This is bigger than I thought. I know East Ridge is crucial during storms. Hell, we've been called out to clear it ourselves during some of the worst weather I've seen. But this," he glanced at the email again, "this is serious." "You're telling me," I replied. "That's why I need your help, Dave. We need to make this public. We need to hold Sarah Langford and the HOA accountable for what they've done." He paused, thinking it over. "All right, I'll reach out to the county office, but this is going to take some time. They're not going to just take our word for it. We'll need more than just this email and your testimony. I'll contact the county clerk, maybe even the district attorney. We'll start building a case." As we spoke, I could see the wheels turning in Dave's head. I had his attention, and he knew how serious this was. He also knew how hard it was to take down a well-established board like the HOA, especially when they held so much influence over the community. But if I had learned anything over the years, it was that sometimes the only way to fight back was to take the fight directly to the people who thought they were untouchable. Dave made some calls right then and there, dialing into the county offices. He spoke to a few people explaining the situation, and I could hear the frustration in his voice when he mentioned the lack of preparedness from Clear Path Services. He didn't give up, though. If anyone could get the authorities to take this seriously, it was him. After a long pause, Dave hung up and turned back to me. "They're sending someone out to take a look at the road. I've got the sheriff on the line, too. He's aware of the situation now. But Tom, you should know this isn't just about the HOA anymore. We've got to go through the legal channels. If they've been doing something illegal, it could get messy." "Messy is fine with me," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. "I've been putting up with their nonsense for too long. I'm done with it." Dave smiled wryly. "Yeah, I can tell. But look, we need to get this in front of the right people. The county needs to know about the road, the barricades, the contractor's failure. Once we've got that, we can start pressing the HOA for answers." I nodded, feeling a bit of relief. At least things were starting to move in the right direction. "Thanks, Dave. Just don't let them sweep this under the rug. People's lives are at stake." "I won't. But we've got to do this by the book," Dave warned. "We'll need more evidence. I'd suggest you start documenting everything, every text, every phone call, and every violation they've thrown your way. If we can make a solid case, we'll make sure the HOA doesn't get away with this." I agreed. I'd been documenting the situation for months, and I was going to make sure I had every piece of evidence in place. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were going to get one. As I left the sheriff's office and stepped out into the snow, I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me. But it wasn't just about the East Ridge Road anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about making sure this community didn't let greed and incompetence destroy what we had. I wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. But I knew Sarah Langford wasn't going to give up easily either. She had her own plans that didn't include me, and I was starting to understand just how far she would go to protect her power. The storm had kept raging, but the worst was yet to come. Despite the authorities finally getting involved, despite the complaints and the mounting pressure from the community, Sarah Langford and the HOA had dug in their heels. They refused to back down, and that meant only one thing: I had to make them listen. The East Ridge Road was the linchpin for our entire neighborhood during a storm like this, and Sarah's refusal to take responsibility had turned a manageable situation into a disaster. The contractor she had hired had proven not only incompetent, but outright negligent. And now, as the snow piled higher, the threat to people's safety was real. I spent the next day doing exactly what I knew would drive Sarah crazy. I documented every failure of the contractor, every mistake they made, and every piece of evidence that proved the HOA had not only ignored warnings, but had actively endangered the community by trying to block my plowing. I dug through the old records, pulling out reports from previous winters showing how the East Ridge access road had been crucial for emergency services. There were emails from paramedics who had written thank you notes for keeping the roads clear during past storms. I grabbed screenshots of my phone from a few days ago where I had warned Sarah about the impending storm, urging her to keep the road open. The icing on the cake was the video I had filmed when I saw ClearPath Services equipment stuck, unable to handle the terrain. As I compiled everything into one neatly organized file, I felt a sense of resolve. It wasn't just about being right anymore. It was about showing the community that this wasn't just a small issue. It was about exposing Sarah's reckless disregard for the safety of her neighbors for the sake of her own ambitions. By the time I had everything sorted, my phone started buzzing with calls and texts from neighbors. Word was getting around, as it always does in a small community. Lynn, the vice president of the HOA, had been quiet during all of this, but now she was getting an earful. A few of the more vocal residents had started organizing, and suddenly it wasn't just me standing up to the HOA. It was a whole community ready to take action. By the time I made my way back to the HOA office, I knew things were about to get ugly. I had all the proof I needed, and now it was time to show Sarah that her game was over. I walked into the office where Sarah was sitting at her desk surrounded by papers. She looked up, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew what was coming. "Tom," she said, her tone icy, "I'm not sure what you're expecting here, but nothing has changed. We made our decision." I set the file on the desk in front of her. "This is what happens when you ignore the warnings, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is what happens when you prioritize bureaucracy and profit over the safety of your community." I slid the file open, letting the evidence spill out in front of her. There were emails from the contractor's CEO confirming that they had no experience with the conditions in Ridgepoint Estates, and there were reports showing how their trucks had been stuck in snowbanks, unable to handle the steep inclines. I showed her the photos, the GPS logs, the weather data that proved the road had been vital during previous storms. I even showed her the video footage of her contractor's equipment buried in snow. "You can't keep ignoring this, Sarah," I said, my voice rising slightly. "People were stuck. People are still stuck. There's no way you can keep defending this. No way you can keep claiming you didn't know." She shifted in her chair, her fingers tapping nervously against the edge of the desk. "You don't understand," she said, trying to regain control. "This is a business decision. We hired the best in the industry. We followed all the proper channels. It's about compliance." "Compliance," I shot back. "Compliance doesn't matter when you're putting people's lives at risk. You can't hide behind contracts and regulations when the whole neighborhood is stuck in a snowstorm because you wanted to make a deal with a contractor you've never even vetted." I took a deep breath, knowing I was walking a fine line. If I pushed too hard, I risked making things worse. But there was no going back now. I wasn't backing down, not anymore. "I've talked to the county, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but carrying weight. "They're aware of the situation, and they're not happy. I've sent them everything, the emails, the pictures, the video. I've got the proof that this was your mess. You're going to have to answer for it." Her face turned pale, and I saw the shift. The bravado she had been carrying all along suddenly faltered. It wasn't enough to stop her from digging in, but I could tell she was beginning to realize how serious this had become. "This is bigger than just you and me, Sarah," I said more softly now. "This is about everyone who lives here. You're not just putting me in a bad position, you're putting the whole community at risk. And the worst part is, you're trying to make it look like you're doing them a favor." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she looked over the evidence again. The realization was settling in. I could tell she was considering her options, whether to continue denying it or to cut her losses and admit she'd made a catastrophic mistake. "I'm not going to let this slide, Sarah," I said firmly. "You've got two choices now. You can either take responsibility for this mess, or you can let the whole community know just how far you'll go to protect your ego." Her silence stretched, and I turned to leave. "I'll see you at the meeting," I added. "If you haven't figured it out by then, I'll make sure everyone knows what happened here." As I walked out, I could feel the weight of the battle ahead. The HOA wasn't going to roll over easily, but now they knew I was serious, and I wasn't going to stop until every last person knew the truth. The tension in the room was palpable as I walked into the community center for the HOA meeting. The storm had subsided, but the issues it had revealed were far from over. Ridgepoint Estates wasn't just facing snowdrifts, it was facing the fallout of a bad decision made by a group of people who refused to admit their mistake. Sarah Langford, the HOA president, stood at the front, trying to keep a hold on the situation, but I could tell the cracks were showing. She had no idea how far the community had come together in the last few days. She cleared her throat, speaking to the gathered crowd. As you all know, the snowstorm was more severe than we anticipated. Sarah began, but I could already hear the defensive tone in her voice. We did our best to hire a qualified contractor to manage snow removal and keep our roads clear. A murmur of disbelief ran through the room. I saw several of the residents exchanging glances, and I could feel the energy shift. No one was buying Sarah's narrative anymore. This wasn't about the storm. This was about her refusal to listen to warnings that had now become reality. She had ignored the people who actually understood this community, the people who had kept it running through the worst weather year after year. I stood up, unable to stay quiet any longer. With all due respect, Sarah, I said, my voice cutting through the room, this wasn't about hiring someone qualified. This was about ignoring the one person who had been reliable, who knew this road inside and out. I warned you about the contractor. I told you they wouldn't be able to handle East Ridge, but you ignored it. You put the whole neighborhood at risk just to save a few bucks. I could see Sarah stiffen at my words, but I wasn't done. This isn't just about a snowstorm or plowing or contracts. I continued stepping forward. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice to maintain control. You wanted to show the community you could do it better, but you've failed. The truth is, the people who live here, my neighbors, are the ones who paid the price for your pride. Lynn, the vice president, shifted uncomfortably beside Sarah, and that was when I saw the first crack in Sarah's carefully constructed facade. She wasn't used to being challenged like this. She wasn't used to her authority being questioned so openly. We hired ClearPath Services because they are professional, Sarah said, her tone tight, but she didn't look me in the eye. And we made the decision to move forward with them to ensure consistency. Consistency? I shot back. Consistency doesn't mean anything. If the company doesn't even know how to handle the roads around here, you can't just throw a contractor into this mix and hope it works out. I've been doing this job for years because I understand the conditions. It's not just about shoveling snow, Sarah. It's about knowing the road, knowing the weather, and knowing the people who depend on it. You didn't get that. There was a long pause before Janine, one of the quieter board members, spoke up. He's right, she said, hesitantly, her voice wavering. People depend on this road. We've been in Ridgepoint for years, and we've never had a problem. But now, the contractor isn't cutting it. I could see Sarah trying to regain control. We will still be moving forward with the contract, she said, her voice shaking slightly, but I'll consider what's been said here. I wasn't about to let her off that easily. Sarah, it's too late for that, I said, my voice steady now, and I turned to the room. The people of this neighborhood deserve more than just promises. You've put them at risk. You've ignored every warning I gave, and now you're trying to backpedal. Well, you can't undo this. People were trapped. The road was closed, and it's your fault. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the evidence I had gathered, emails, weather data, and photos of the contractor's truck stuck in the snow. I laid them out in front of Sarah, knowing that this was the moment where she had nowhere left to hide. You can't keep ignoring this, I said, letting the words land. The contractor was unqualified, and your financial ties with them are a clear conflict of interest. The room went silent as Sarah glanced down at the papers, her face turning pale. The evidence was undeniable. The truth was out in the open now. You've already made the decision to hire ClearPath Services, I said, standing firm, but that doesn't absolve you from responsibility. People depend on that road. I've cleared it for years, and you're not going to put that in jeopardy just because of some misguided decision. The community was with me now. I could feel it. There were murmurs of agreement, nods from the crowd, and even a few neighbors standing up ready to speak. Sarah was cornered, and for the first time, it was clear that she wasn't in control anymore. Sarah's voice faltered. I'll make sure to look into it, she stammered, but it was too late. She had already made her choice, and it had cost the neighborhood. As the meeting continued, I knew this was just the beginning. The HOA would fight back, of course. They'd dig in their heels, play the victim, and spin this into some story about safety concerns and professionalism. But they couldn't hide behind that anymore. The truth had come out, and the community had seen it for what it was, a simple case of arrogance and mismanagement. I didn't care if it got ugly. This wasn't just about the HOA. It was about making sure this neighborhood understood that they didn't have to take what they were given. They could stand up, and that's exactly what I intended to do. The emergency meeting was called to order, and I could feel the weight of the room as soon as I walked in. The community center was packed, more packed than I had ever seen it for an HOA meeting. Neighbors had come out in full force, and it was clear that they weren't there to support the board. They were there for answers. Sarah Langford might have tried to control the narrative before, but now the story had shifted, and she was no longer the one holding the reins. I took a seat in the back of the room, my nerves steady, but my heart racing. The HOA board members sat at the front, their expressions carefully composed, but I could tell by the way they shifted in their seats that they were feeling the pressure. As soon as the meeting began, Sarah tried to assert control. She cleared her throat and looked around at the crowd, trying to give the impression of confidence. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice just a little too high-pitched, trying to hide the nervousness. "We've had a lot of feedback on the snow removal situation, and we're here to address the concerns." I could barely stop myself from scoffing. This wasn't about concerns anymore. This was about accountability. It wasn't just about snow removal. It was about Sarah Langford's decisions endangering the entire neighborhood. "I've asked the board to take a look at all the facts." She continued her gaze, quickly flicking over to me. "We've hired Clear Path Services, a professional snow removal company with years of experience. We've heard complaints, yes, but we're confident that moving forward with them is the best option." There was a collective murmur of disbelief from the crowd. People were already beginning to realize what had been happening. They had seen the chaos unfold, the trucks stuck in snowbanks, the road left blocked, and the hospital visit delayed. They weren't buying it anymore. From the back of the room I stood up. The eyes of the entire room shifted to me. Sarah tensed, clearly anticipating what was coming. "I've heard enough," I said, my voice loud and steady. "We don't need more assurances from Clear Path Services. What we need is an explanation of why this road was left closed when it's the only emergency access for this entire side of Ridge Point." The crowd grew quiet. Sarah clenched her fists at the podium, her lips tight. She tried to speak, but I wasn't done. "This isn't about a snowstorm. This is about people's lives," I continued. "I've been plowing that road for 12 years. Every winter, I make sure it's safe. But now, after Sarah Langford and her board made their decisions, we're stuck here. Clear Path Services can't handle this terrain. The proof is right there in front of us. The road was blocked, and now we're stuck." The crowd began murmuring in agreement. I saw neighbors nodding, their eyes fixed on me. They weren't with Sarah anymore. Sarah opened her mouth, clearly ready to defend her position. But before she could get the words out, Lynn, the vice president, spoke up. "We need to listen to Jack. He's the one who's been keeping this community safe for years. He's the one who knows the roads." The crowd's support shifted, and Sarah saw it. The truth was out. She tried to salvage the situation by addressing the board, but the damage was done. The room wasn't listening to her anymore. She stumbled through a few words, but Jack's voice, clear and unwavering, cut her off again. "You ignored the one person who knew this road, and now look at what we're dealing with." Sarah's expression twisted in anger, but she couldn't hide the guilt. The board had been put on the spot, and she could feel the shift in the room. There was no way out for her now. She had undermined the entire community in her need to exert control and fill her pockets. By the time I finished speaking, it was clear that the board was scrambling. Sarah's face had gone pale, and the once confident board members were shifting nervously in their seats, their earlier resolve slipping away. They couldn't deny the truth anymore. The damage had been done, and the contractor's failure was too visible to ignore. Now it was time to show them how deep the hole they had dug really was. "I have more than just words," I said, pulling a stack of documents from my bag. I set them down on the table, my eyes meeting Sarah's. "You've ignored warnings, but here's the evidence." I began with the email I had found, the one between Sarah and the contractor, showing the financial ties between them. Sarah shifted uncomfortably as I laid it out for the room. "This email proves that your decision wasn't about safety, it was about financial gain. You're not just putting us at risk, you're lining your pockets while the neighborhood suffers." The room was quiet now, the only sound, the rustle of paper, as I slid the email in front of Sarah. The email was damning, and Sarah knew it. She tried to speak, but her words faltered. She couldn't explain her way out of this one. I moved on to the next piece of evidence, the weather reports, the GPS coordinates, and the photos showing how the contractor's equipment had failed in real time. The trucks stuck in snowdrifts, unable to make it through. The East Ridge access road buried in snow, left unplowed by the company they hired. "The only thing these guys have been consistent about is their incompetence," I said, looking around the room. "But we already know that. We all saw it happening." And then the final blow. The weather logs that showed just how crucial the East Ridge Road was during a snowstorm. They were timestamped, showing how the road had been cleared in previous years by me to ensure that emergency vehicles could get through no matter what. I looked back at Sarah, her face tight with frustration. "You knew about this, didn't you? You knew this road was critical. But you didn't care, did you?" She didn't answer. "Sarah," I continued, "this is what happens when you prioritize contracts over lives." It was a gut punch to her ego, and the board members were starting to understand just how badly they had miscalculated. This wasn't about snow removal. This was about putting their self-interest over the community. And they couldn't hide it anymore. The fallout was immediate. Sarah Langford couldn't keep her composure anymore. Her face flushed with anger, but there was fear in her eyes now too. The evidence was clear, and the community had seen it for what it was. The HOA's decisions had endangered lives, and now they had no choice but to face the consequences. One by one, the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lynn, the vice president, was the first to speak. "Sarah," she said, her voice softer now, "maybe it's time to step down." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She knew what was happening. The board was turning on her. They had no choice but to acknowledge their mistake. The room was no longer in her control. The community had won. With a heavy sigh, Sarah stood up, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I'll step down," she said, her voice barely audible. The crowd didn't cheer. There was no victory dance, no applause. But there was a shift. The community had won. The HOA had been exposed, and Sarah Langford had been forced to step down in disgrace. The storm had finally passed, but the real change wasn't in the weather, it was in the community. Ridgepoint Estates had weathered the literal storm, and now we were facing the aftermath of something much bigger, a change in how we saw each other and how we saw our HOA. As I stood in the parking lot, the fresh air cold on my face, I could hear snippets of conversations from the neighbors. I saw Bill, the man who relied on the road to make his dialysis appointments, walk past me, giving me a nod of appreciation. Janine, the nurse who had voiced her concerns early on, stopped to thank me again. They weren't the only ones. Sarah Langford's resignation had been the tipping point. Now the community was coming together. The divisions that had once existed between the residents and the HOA board had evaporated. We weren't just a collection of homes in a suburban sprawl anymore. We were neighbors. People were finally talking to each other, sharing their experiences, and acknowledging the value of what we had been neglecting for so long. This wasn't just about snow removal. It was about real, tangible community. The legal fallout didn't take long to unfold. The county sheriff's office had already confirmed that the East Ridge Road was a critical emergency route, and that Sarah Langford and the HOA had failed to properly maintain it. The county filed a formal complaint which pushed the HOA into a corner. The fines for neglecting the road and the negligence in snow removal were substantial. The HOA was ordered to pay for the damages caused by the contractor's failures, and they were forced to amend their policies regarding road management. This included hiring a qualified emergency snow removal operator with proper vetting and community input. The HOA was also required to issue an apology to the residents, acknowledging their mistakes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As for me, well, I was officially reinstated as the emergency snow removal operator. It wasn't the title that mattered to me, it was the fact that the community now knew who was looking out for them. The HOA had been forced to face the reality of their decisions, and the legal consequences were just the beginning. Months passed, and the snow began to melt away from Ridgepoint Estates. But the changes didn't stop with the weather. Ridgepoint Estates was different now. The scars of the battle had faded, but the lessons stuck. The HOA had made sweeping changes. They now had a community board for decision-making, ensuring transparency and input from all the residents. Derek, the former board president, had approached me personally with a quiet apology, acknowledging his part in the mess and asking for my help in the future. It wasn't much, but it was genuine. And then the real twist. The HOA was finally seeing the value of experience over bureaucracy. They had officially requested my expertise in future winter storm plans, ensuring the community would be better prepared. It felt like the right thing to do, working together. One chilly morning in early fall, as I drove past the freshly plowed East Ridge Road, I spotted a familiar face, Sarah Langford. She was no longer wearing her HOA badge. Instead, she stood by the road, watching as the new snow removal team worked alongside me. For the first time, I saw a hint of respect in her eyes. Maybe she had learned something, but what mattered most was the road clear, safe, and ready for whatever the weather could throw at it. As I continued down the road, I couldn't help but think about how far we had come. Sometimes it takes a storm to strip everything away, to expose the flaws. But in the end, it wasn't just about getting the job done, it was about doing it for the people who matter most. And for the first time, it felt like the community understood that. Looking back, the win wasn't what mattered most. The real victory came in how we handled the whole situation by sticking to the right process. If I had let my anger take control, things would have gone differently. The legal steps I took to expose the HOA's wrongdoings were what changed the outcome, not the frustration or rage that simmered beneath the surface. Staying grounded in the truth, documenting everything, taking it through the right channels, was the key to bringing them to justice. There's a line between standing up for what's right and letting emotions dictate your actions. Standing up legally doesn't mean escalating things emotionally or violently. It's about gathering the evidence and letting the process do the work. The law offers the structure to expose wrongs without causing harm or chaos. I knew from the start that this fight would only be won with facts, not fury. To anyone facing a similar situation, my advice is simple: keep records, stay organized, and never hesitate to involve authorities when needed. The legal process can be slow, but it ensures that your actions stay within the boundaries of what's fair. You don't have to do it alone, and there are people who can help guide you. Communities thrive when we respect the law, when power like the HOAs isn't allowed to go unchecked. The real strength comes when we hold each other accountable, and when we know how to defend what's ours legally and peacefully. Just like the East Ridge Road where everything began, there's a certain peace that comes with standing firm and letting the legal system work for you.